"You don't belong here, Parasite." Those were the first words my dad said to me that Easter night. Not hello. Not how you have been. Just that. I stood there in my late mom's house, holding the peppermint pie I'd baked from her old recipe, while he sat at the head of the dining table like a stranger who had conquered everything she once loved. His new wife, Diana, was laughing too loudly, her hand draped over his arm, her daughter scrolling through her phone as if I were invisible. The family portrait above the mantel no longer showed my mom's face. It was them now smiling in matching sweaters. My heart pounded as his words echoed through the room again, sharp and final. "Leave, you don't have a place here." I set the pie down slowly, smiled through the heat burning behind my eyes, and thought he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. The moment froze like a photograph I couldn't tear my eyes from. Every sound in the room seemed to fade. The clinking of silverware, the soft murmur of their laughter, even the carols playing faintly in the background. I could still smell the pine from the tree my mom and I used to decorate together, but now it only reminded me how easily someone could erase a life and pretend it never existed. My dad turned back to his plate, as if dismissing me had been no more than brushing away a speck of dust. Diana whispered something in his ear and smiled a victory smile, the kind that told me this had been rehearsed. I didn't say a word. I just stood there long enough to memorize it all. The glint of the chandelier, the smug curve of her mouth, the way his cufflinks caught the light. Then I picked up my coat, walked back into the cold night, and let the door close behind me. The snow was still falling slow and steady, softening everything it touched. But inside me, something sharp had just begun to take shape. I walked toward my car, my breath fogging in the air. The world quiet except for the crunch of snow beneath my boots. I didn't look back. The peppermint pie was still sitting on the counter inside untouched, but it didn't matter. I had brought something else with me that night. Proof, patience, and a plan I didn't even know I was building yet. When I slid into the driver's seat, my phone buzzed with a message from Grace. "Are you okay? Fine," I typed back. It went as planned. As I started the car, the house disappeared behind me in the rearview mirror. The lights blurred through the falling snow, glowing faintly like a memory fading too slow to die. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and whispered to myself, "Let him think he's won." The road stretched ahead dark and endless, but I didn't feel lost. For the first time in years, I felt awake. Every cruel word, every slight glance, every quiet betrayal was still inside me waiting. The kind of waiting that wasn't weak but deliberate. The kind that comes before something changes forever. And in that moment, driving through the snow, I made a promise, not out loud, not to him, but to her, to my mom, that one day this house, her house, would remember who it truly belonged to. That's how the night began. The night my dad called me a parasite. The night he thought he had erased me for good. He didn't know that by doing it, he'd written his own ending. The next morning, the smell of peppermint still lingered in my car, faint and bitter like a memory that refused to leave. I drove to my small apartment on the edge of town and sat in the driveway for a long time before going inside. The silence felt heavier than usual. I placed my keys onto the counter, took off my coat, and stood by the window looking at the frost spreading across the glass. My hands were still trembling, not from anger, but from restraint. Every part of me wanted to scream, to drive back and throw open those doors, but I didn't. I had learned something about my dad years ago. The louder you got, the quieter he won. I made coffee and scrolled through my phone, the screen bright against the dim kitchen. A message waited from Grace Harlow, my mom's oldest friend, and the woman who had handled all of her legal affairs after she passed. Her text was short. "Call me when you can." I took a deep breath and hit the dial. Her voice came through warm, but edged with concern. "Jayla, honey, how did it go?" "It went exactly as expected," I said. "He told me to leave. He called me a parasite this time." There was a long pause. I could almost hear her sigh. "He's living there, isn't he?" "Yes, with his new wife and her daughter. They redecorated everything. Even the family photo over the fireplace is gone." Grace's tone changed firm and sharp. "That's not right. You know your mom's will? The house was deeded to you exclusively." I walked to my desk and pulled out the folder she had sent me a year after. Mom died. I had read it once, but never really looked. Now I flipped through the pages until I found the section she was talking about. There it was in clear print. The property at 143 Maple Ridge Lane was to belong solely to me. No transfer, no cohabitation with any future spouse of James Kent. I traced the words with my finger, the ink slightly smudged from the years. Grace kept talking. "Your mom wanted to make sure he could never erase her. That house was her life's work. She taught half this town's kids in that little study by the window. I remembered it vividly. The smell of chalk, the creak of the wooden chair, the way the sun hit her hair every afternoon. She used to tell me that a home was a person's story written on walls and floors. That night I realized he had rewritten hers. Grace's voice softened again. "You have every legal right to that property, Jayla, every inch of it." I nodded slowly, gripping the papers tighter. "I think he knows that," I said. "That's why he hates me." There was silence between us, comfortable but heavy. Then she said, "Come by tomorrow. We'll go through everything again. If he's living there against the terms of the will, we can start the process." After we hung up, I sat at my desk staring at the documents spread before me. The words looked cold and clean, unlike the mess they described. I found an old envelope at the back of the drawer with my mom's handwriting on. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a small note she'd written years ago when she was sick. "If he ever tries to take what's mine, remember it's yours. Don't let him make you small." I folded the note back carefully. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. Not this time. I took out my laptop and began scanning every page of the will, saving copies to an encrypted folder. Then I opened a new document and started a list. Proof of residency, property records, witness statements, dates of entry. It felt methodical, almost mechanical, but the rhythm steadied me. I pulled out the external hard drive where I stored old family photos. Each file was a piece of evidence in its own way. My mom in front of the rose bushes, me on the porch with my graduation gown. The same living room is now filled with strangers. The next afternoon, I met Grace at her office downtown. The place smelled of coffee and old paper, the kind of scent that reminded me of my mom's classroom. Grace sat behind her desk glasses, perched low on her nose, flipping through a binder. "He's overstepped," she said simply. "And it's time we fix that." We spent hours going over documents, property transfers, and tax records. Grace explained that because the deed was never contested, my dad had no legal right to move in. What he was doing was a violation of probate. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "we document everything. Photos, receipts, witnesses. We'll serve him with a notice when the time's right. But we do this clean." Quiet. That word stuck with me, quiet. It was exactly how Mom handled everything. She never fought with noise. She fought with proof. When I got home, the sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, scrolling through pictures of the house I had taken years ago. Each image felt like a small rebellion against the people now sitting at that same table, pretending they belonged there. A week later, I drove by Maple Ridge Lane again. The snow had turned to slush, the driveway lined with tire marks. Through the window, I saw lights on in the living room. Diana stood by the fireplace, rearranging decorations. My dad sat on the couch, glass of whiskey in hand. I parked down the street, camera ready. Every frame mattered. Every timestamp was another line in the story they didn't know I was writing. When I got home that night, I uploaded the footage to my drive and made a backup. Grace was right. This had to be done legally, methodically. But as I watched the video again, I felt something deeper stir inside me. It wasn't just anger, it was resolved. The next morning, Grace called. "You've done good," she said. "I'll start preparing the draft." "What a draft?" She hesitated. "The initial claim of ownership. Once it's filed, the court will have to recognize your sole right to occupy. If he refuses, we proceed to eviction." Eviction. The word sounded harsh, but fair. I thought about all the times my dad had told me to get out, to leave, to disappear. Maybe this was what justice looked like. Not screaming or breaking things, but standing still until the law caught up. That night, I opened my mom's old recipe book, the one with the peppermint pie folded between pages of notes. Her handwriting danced across the paper, delicate and sure. I touched it gently, whispering to her memory, "I'm not letting him win." Outside, the first snow of the new year began to fall, slow and soft against the windowpane. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat back, and watched it pile on the sill. There was still a long way to go, but the path felt clear. For once, I wasn't the daughter running from his voice. I was the woman walking back toward my mom's promise. The first time I saw Diana after Easter, she was standing on the front porch of my mom's house, wearing a fur-collared coat and smiling like she owned the place. The sight hit me harder than I expected. The shutters were painted a pale gray now, not the robin's egg blue my mom loved. The wreath on the door was fake plastic pine with gold ribbons, nothing like the simple, evergreen branches my mom used to gather from the backyard. I sat in my car for a long moment, watching through the windshield. Diana's reflection in the glass looked like a stranger dropped into a memory that didn't belong to her. I parked by the curb and stepped out. The air smelled of wet leaves and wood smoke. When she noticed me, her eyebrows lifted, polite but wary. "Jayla, what a surprise. Just stopping by," I said, keeping my voice even. I wanted to check on a few things Mom left behind. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then pushed the door open wider. Of course. Come in. The house was almost unrecognizable. The floral wallpaper was gone, replaced by beige paint and family photos of them, not us. In the hallway where my mom used to hang student art projects, there was now a giant mirror framed in silver. The reflection of Diana's new world looked perfect and hollow. She walked ahead of me in her heels, each click echoing against the hardwood floor. I noticed how the scent of her perfume filled the air, sweet and artificial. I could almost hear my mom's voice whispering that real elegance never needed to announce itself. You know, your dad and I have worked hard to make this house feel like home again, she said. It was so dark before, so heavy. I bit back the words on my tongue. Dark, heavy. She meant my mom. She led me to the living room. Eden was there on the couch, earbuds in, scrolling through her phone. She barely glanced up. Her blonde hair gleamed under the soft light, the picture of disinterest. I see you've been busy, I said, running my fingers along the edge of the mantel. The family photo of my parents that used to hang there was gone. In its place was a framed picture of Diana, Dad, and Eden at the beach. Diana smiled. We thought a fresh start was good for everyone. I opened the cabinet below the mantel. It was empty except for a box labeled donation. Inside were my mom's old porcelain figurines, the ones she collected every Easter. What are these doing here? I asked quietly. Diana waved a hand. Oh, those were decluttering. They didn't really fit with the new look. Something in my chest tightened. Those weren't just decorations. Each one was a memory of a year, a season, a person. Eden finally looked up. Mom says you used to live here, right? I turned to her. I did. She smiled faintly. Must be weird coming back and seeing it all changed. Weird wasn't the word. It was erased in slow motion. I closed the cabinet door gently and straightened. Diana crossed her arms, watching me carefully, like she could sense the temperature in the room shifting. You know, Jayla, your dad's been through a lot, she said softly. It's taken time for him to heal. You showing up unexpectedly well, it stirs things up. Maybe try to give him space. Space! The same word he used when he kicked me out of my mom's funeral arrangements. The same word he used when he cleared her things before the headstone was even carved. I met her gaze. I'm not here to stir things up. I just want what's mine. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. Your mom was a lovely woman, but you can't live in the past forever. She would have wanted you to move on. I almost laughed at that. She didn't know my mom. My mom would have rather burned the house down than see this woman replace her in it. Instead, I nodded politely. Maybe you're right. Diana relaxed, mistaking my calm for surrender. She gestured toward the kitchen. Coffee? Sure, I said. While she busied herself with the machine, I looked around quietly. Small details betrayed her. A jewelry box on the counter that didn't belong. Letters addressed to James and Diana Kent stacked neatly in a basket. Even the mail told a story of intrusion. I slipped my phone from my pocket and snapped a few discreet photos. Grace would need them. Each frame captured proof that my dad and Diana were living in a property that legally wasn't theirs. The smell of coffee filled the air. Diana handed me a cup. Her nails painted the same crimson as the holiday decorations she had chosen. So what do you do now? She asked. I'm in tech, I said. I work for myself mostly. Ah, self-employed. That's nice. Must give you a lot of free time. The words sounded harmless, but the tone wasn't. I smiled slightly. Not as much as you'd think. Eden yawned loudly, stretching. I have class soon, she said. Diana turned to her. Take your coat, sweetheart. It's cold. As they moved towards the door, I slipped into the study, pretending to look for a book. The room smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish. My mom's old desk was still there, but stripped of her things. The drawers were empty except for a crumpled envelope in the corner. Inside was a receipt from an antique dealer dated 3 months earlier. The items listed matched the set of porcelain figurines now marked for donation. I tucked the receipt into my pocket just as Diana's heels clicked back toward the room. Find what you were looking for, she asked. I smiled. I did. She looked uncertain, searching my face for meaning. I thanked her for the coffee and walked to the door. On my way out, I glanced at the garden. The rose bushes my mom planted had been cut down to stumps. In their place were ornamental grasses and a bird bath that looked new. It hit me harder than the empty shelves inside. The roses had been her pride, each one named for a student she loved. As I reached my car, I heard Diana's voice behind me. Jayla, wait. I turned. She was standing in the doorway, her coat pulled tight. I hope we can find peace in all this. Your dad really wants to keep the family together. I studied her for a moment. There was something rehearsed in her concern. I nodded. Of course, peace. When I drove away, I didn't look back. My hands gripped the wheel tight as I merged onto the main road. The radio played softly some old song my mom used to hum. My phone buzzed with a new message from Grace. Any luck? Plenty, I typed. I have pictures. And a receipt. Good girl, she replied. Keep them talking, but don't let them see what's coming. The sun broke through the clouds for a moment, spilling light across the dashboard. I thought about Diana's perfect smile, the empty cabinet. The rose bushes turned to dirt. All of it fed the quiet fire building in my chest. By the time I reached home, the sky was deep gray. I saved the photos, scanned the receipt, and added them to my growing file. The folder on my desktop read proof. I clicked save, watching the little progress bar move. For a long time, I sat there in the dark, the hum of my computer the only sound in the room. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burned too fast. What I felt now was steadier, colder something that would last. Grace's office was quiet, except for the sound of the clock ticking behind her desk. I sat across from her, a stack of papers between us, my coffee untouched. The sunlight through the blinds drew narrow stripes across the folder, labeled Kent Estate. I had been here before years ago when my mom's will was first read, but this time felt different. Back then I was grieving. Now I was building something. Grace looked at me over her glasses, her eyes calm but sharp. She had the kind of steadiness that made people tell her things they wouldn't tell anyone else. You've done your homework, she said. Photos, receipts, statements. This is exactly what we need. I nodded. They've sold things, changed the property, and they're living there full time. Grace leaned back, folding her hands. Then we have them. Everything they've done violates their will. Your mom's terms were clear. Exclusive ownership, no shared occupancy. Her voice was practical legal, but my mind wasn't. It was back in that house, hearing my dad's voice cutting through the air, hearing the word parasite echo like a verdict. I forced myself to breathe. What happens next? I asked. We start with a letter, she said. A formal notice. If he ignores it, we file. It will move fast once the paperwork hits the system. She opened a folder and pulled out several old documents, spreading them across the desk. I recognized my mom's handwriting on some of them. There was something comforting about the loops and curls of her script, steady even toward the end when her hands had started to tremble. I want you to see something, Grace said. She handed me a document I hadn't seen before, a notarized statement dated 3 months before my mom's death. It authorized Grace to manage all financial matters if Mom became incapacitated. My dad's name wasn't anywhere on it. Your dad tried to contest this once, she said quietly, but he dropped it when he realized your mom's records were airtight. I stared at the page. There was something else attached behind it, a printout of an email chain between my dad and a financial advisor. The subject line read, Account Access. Grace turned the page for me. This came from the bank during discovery, she said. He tried to withdraw funds from her account while she was in hospice. Claimed he had her consent. He didn't. My stomach twisted. For years I'd convinced myself that my dad's cruelty was emotional, not criminal. Seeing proof in black and white stripped away whatever part of me still wanted to believe there was decency left in him. Grace must have seen my expression because her voice softened. You can use this if you need to, but the house is the priority. Once you re-establish possession, everything else will fall into place. I nodded, sliding the papers back into the folder. Thank you, Grace. She smiled faintly. Don't thank me yet. He's not the kind of man who goes quietly. I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat, my hands tight around the steering wheel. The sun was setting, casting long orange streaks over the road. When I stopped at a light, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My mom's eyes looked back at me steady and clear. At home, I spread everything across the table. The will, the financial records, the photos. It looked like the aftermath of a storm laid out in order. I scanned every page and backed them up on a cloud drive. Then I took out my old laptop, the one I had used when I was working at the tech firm in Chicago, and opened a file recovery program. If my dad had been sending emails to that advisor, there might be more. Hours passed. The only sound was the quiet hum of the computer. Then, just before midnight, a folder appeared in the recovered files. It was labeled Estate Accounts. Inside were emails between my dad and a man named Tom Barlow, dated weeks before my mom died. Tom, she won't sign the transfer. Make it look like a joint consent, she won't know. My chest tightened. He had forged her approval. I scrolled through more messages, my pulse steadying instead of racing. I had what I needed. The next morning, I called Grace. Her voice was brisk but pleased when I told her. Save everything, she said. Don't send yet. I'll handle the filings. I closed my laptop and sat back staring at the ceiling. For the first time since my mom's death, I didn't feel helpless. I felt purposeful. That afternoon, I went for a walk through town. The air smelled of wood smoke and winter rain. Maple Ridge looked small and quiet, the kind of place where everyone's curtains closed at the same time each evening. I passed the bakery where Mom used to buy cinnamon rolls and the library where she volunteered. Every corner of this town had her fingerprints. Losing the house hadn't just been losing a building. It was like losing the last trace of her in the world. When I got home, I found an envelope under my door. My name was written in a neat, careful script. Inside was a letter from Grace. "Keep your distance for now," it said. "Don't confront them. We'll let the law do the talking." I placed the letter on the counter and poured myself a cup of tea. I watched the steam rise and curl in the quiet kitchen. My mom had always believed that patience was the hardest part of justice. You had to trust that the truth would land when it was meant to. The next few days were slow. I filled the silence with routine. Work walks scanning old family photos. At night, I would sit by the window, the laptop glow casting faint light across my hands. Sometimes I caught myself whispering to my mom, telling her about each new piece of proof I'd found, as if she were sitting across from me nodding in approval. One evening, Grace called again. "I filed the first notice today," she said. "He'll receive it by courier tomorrow morning, and if he ignores it," I asked. "Then we file for possession. It will move quickly once it starts." I thanked her and hung up. The quiet in my apartment seemed to stretch around me like fabric, soft but heavy. I opened my phone and scrolled to a photo I had taken of the house. The windows glowed warm, but I could imagine the tension brewing inside once that letter arrived. The following morning, I woke early and drove to the park near Maple Ridge. From there, I could see the outline of my mom's house across the trees. It was still ordinary, the kind of morning where nothing seemed out of place. But I knew that behind those walls the ground was beginning to shift. I sat on a bench, the cold air biting at my fingers. I thought about all the years I'd let my dad's anger define the limits of my own voice. Every insult, every manipulation, every moment he made me doubt my worth. He had used silence as a weapon, but this time silence was mine. When I got back to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Grace. He received it. "No response yet." I smiled faintly and started the engine. That was fine. Some storms didn't need thunder to be real. They built quietly, slow and certain, until the moment the first crack of lightning made everyone remember what they'd ignored. That night, I printed another copy of the documents and sealed them in an envelope. I wrote one word on the front: proof. Then I placed it in my safe, closed the door, and turned the lock. For the first time since I could remember, I slept through the night without dreaming of that house. The war had already begun, but it was the kind of war my mom would have understood. Quiet. Clean. Unstoppable! The snow had started falling again the night I decided to go back. I watched it from my apartment window, tiny flakes drifting in the streetlight, covering the world in silence. The house had stayed in my mind for months. Every light, every sound, every room haunted by a memory I couldn't erase. Grace said patience was power, but patience felt a lot like waiting to breathe. So I decided to make my own timing. It was Easter Eve, 1 year since my dad had called me a parasite. I told myself I was only going to drop off flowers at the gate, maybe a small gift in my mom's honor. But deep down, I knew I was walking straight into the storm I had been preparing for. The drive to Maple Ridge was slow, the roads slick with ice. Every turn of the wheel felt deliberate. I kept the folder of papers in the passenger seat tucked neatly under my coat. Inside were copies of the notice Grace had filed proof of ownership, and the final letter she had drawn up in case he still refused to comply. My heartbeat stayed steady, not from calm, but from decision. I had rehearsed every word I might say and every word I would not. When I pulled up, the house glowed like a picture in a catalog. The windows shimmered with gold lights. The smell of roasted meat drifted through the cold air. A tree stood tall in the front window, wrapped in ornaments I didn't recognize. The driveway was full, cars lined up along the curb. It wasn't just dinner. It was a celebration. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, watching through the windshield. Inside, I could see people moving, laughing, and raising glasses. I felt that old ache rise in my chest, the familiar pulse of being on the outside looking in. Then I saw him. My dad standing at the head of the table again, his hand on Diana's shoulder, smiling for an audience. I took a breath, reached for my bag, and stepped out of the car. The air was sharp and cold, burning my lungs. My boots crunched on the snow as I crossed the street. Each step felt heavier than the one before. When I reached the porch, I pressed the doorbell. The sound echoed inside. For a moment, no one came. Then footsteps, the click of heels. The door opened. Diana stood there in a deep red dress, her smile polished and hollow. "Jayla, what a surprise." I smiled lightly. "Merry Easter, Diana." Her eyes flickered down to the folder in my hand, then back to my face. "Are you here to join us?" I shook my head. "Just dropping something off." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Your dad's in the dining room." I stepped inside before she could change her mind. The house smelled like cinnamon and wine. Laughter floated from the dining room, and as I walked in, the noise fell. My dad turned, carving a knife still in his hand. His expression froze between irritation and disbelief. "You again," he said quietly. "Merry Easter, Dad." His jaw clenched. "You have some nerve walking in here after what you pulled." I looked around the table. There were people I didn't know, neighbors maybe, or Diana's friends. Eden sat beside her mom, phone in hand, pretending to be fascinated by the screen. "Relax," I said softly. "I'm not here to cause trouble, just to deliver something." I placed the folder on the sideboard near the tree, next to a platter of cookies. The tree lights blinked against the polished wood. "What's that?" he asked. "A gift," I said. He took a step closer. His voice dropped lower. "You think you can intimidate me with paperwork?" I met his eyes. "No, I think the truth can do that on its own." For a moment, the only sound in this room was the clock on the wall ticking toward 7. I saw the vein in his temple pulse. Diana touched his arm gently, murmuring something, but he shook her off. "Get out." "Not yet," I said. "You should read what's inside first." I could feel the tension spreading through the room like smoke. The guests exchanged uneasy looks. Someone coughed. The air felt thick. I moved to the table, resting my hand on the back of an empty chair. This was Mom's seat, the one she always took at Easter. You remember, don't you? She used to make peppermint pie every year, and she'd slice it right here. He slammed the knife down. "Don't talk about her." "Why not?" "You already took her house. Might as well erase her name, too." His face turned red. "You're pathetic. You're trying to punish me because I moved on." I took a slow breath. "No, Dad. I'm holding you accountable because you broke the law." Diana gasped softly. "What are you talking about?" I nodded toward the folder. "The house belongs to me. Always has. The will, the deed, the filings. Grace Harlow sent the first notice months ago. You chose to ignore it." He laughed short and sharp. "You think a few papers mean anything. This is my home. It was Mom's home, now it's legally mine." He stared at me, realization flickering through the anger. "You planned this." I smiled faintly. "You told me once that I didn't belong here. I believed you for a while. Then I remembered whose name was on the deed." Diana stepped forward, her voice rising. "You can't just walk in here and claim everything. We've built a life. You built it on someone else's foundation. I'm just taking back what was already mine." The doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the silence like a blade. My dad frowned. "Expecting someone," he muttered. I glanced at the clock. 7:15. Right on schedule. Diana moved toward the door. I stayed still, watching. Moments later, a man in a dark coat stepped inside, holding a sealed envelope. His voice was clear and formal. "James Kent." My dad straightened. "Who's asking?" The man extended the envelope. "You've been served." The words hung in the air. For a second, no one moved. My dad's face was drained of color. The man handed him the papers and turned to leave, professional and calm. "What is this?" Diana demanded. "Grace's notice of enforcement," I said quietly. "It means the court recognizes my ownership. You're living in a property that isn't yours." My dad's voice cracked. "You did this on Easter. You started it on Easter," I said. For a long moment we stood facing each other, the lights from the tree reflecting in his eyes. The room behind him felt frozen, every guest pretending not to breathe. I picked up my coat from the back of a chair. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The silence was louder than anything I could have said. "Enjoy dinner," I said finally. "The pie's on the porch." He said something under his breath, but I didn't turn around. I walked out into the cold, the night air sharp against my face. The sky was heavy with clouds and the snow had started again, flakes landing softly on my hair. From the car, I looked back once. Through the window, I saw him standing there, holding the envelope. Diana beside him, her perfect smile gone. The lights flickered, one string dimming like the house itself was exhaling. I started the engine and drove away. The road stretched out ahead, dark and empty. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring, faint and solemn. I listened until the sound faded, until only the hum of the tires filled the quiet. For the first time in years, I felt no anger, no fear. Just the steady calm of knowing that truth had finally found its way to the doorstep. The next morning, the phone rang before sunrise. I had barely slept. The image of my dad standing in that dining room still burned behind my eyes. The call came from Grace. Her voice was steady, the way it always was when she was about to deliver something important. "It's done," she said. "The notice has been acknowledged by the county clerk. They can't dispute it now." I sat up in bed, the room still dark except for a thin line of light through the blinds. What happens next? I asked. Now we wait for the response. If they resist, law enforcement will assist with possession. You don't need to be there when it happens. I hesitated. I think I should be. Grace sighed softly. Jayla, I know what you want, but this isn't about confrontation. It's about closure. Let the law speak for you. I promised I would think about it, but I already knew my answer. By mid-morning, the news had already spread through town. Maple Ridge was small, and people noticed things. Someone had seen the process server's car outside the Kent house. By noon, I had 3 messages from old neighbors, all curious. I deleted them without replying. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Still, I drove out to the neighborhood that afternoon. The snow had turned to slush again, the curbs lined with melting piles of gray ice. I parked at the corner far enough not to be seen. From the car, I could see the porch. The wreath was gone. The lights had been taken down. A shadow moved past the front window, then another. The curtains closed. I waited. It wasn't about satisfaction. It was about seeing the truth take shape in real time. The house that had once been stolen from my mom was starting to remember who it belonged to. Around noon the next day, Grace called again. The sheriff's office has scheduled the civil standby for tomorrow morning. He'll have to vacate or risk legal penalties. I exhaled slowly. Do you think he'll go quietly? Grace paused. Men like your dad don't go quietly, but they go eventually. That night, I packed a small bag with documents, a camera, and the original deed. The air outside my apartment smelled like rain. I set my alarm for 6. The drive the next morning was silent except for the hum of the tires. The sky was the color of pewter, the kind of light that made everything feel suspended. When I turned onto Maple Ridge Lane, a police car was already parked by the curb. A second vehicle, dark blue with county markings, stood behind it. The deputy met me halfway up the walk. Ms. Kent, he asked. I nodded. He tipped his hat slightly. We're here to make sure everything stays civil. Your attorney mentioned you'd have paperwork. I handed him the envelope. He skimmed the first page, nodded again, and walked toward the porch. The front door opened before he could knock. My dad stood there, face pale, jaw tight. Morning, Mr. Kent, the deputy said. You've been notified of the order. We're here to make sure the transfer proceeds peacefully. My dad's voice cracked slightly. This is ridiculous. She's my daughter. The deputy kept his tone neutral. That may be, sir, but the property deed lists her as the sole owner. You were given 30 days to respond. That period expired. Diana appeared behind him, her hair unbrushed, eyes red. She clutched her robe tighter, her voice trembling. You can't just throw us out, it's Easter week. The deputy's expression didn't change. I'm not throwing anyone out, ma'am. I'm supervising a legal order. You'll have time to collect essentials today. I stood a few steps back, watching. The air smelled faintly of pine, and something else, something metallic, like tension. My dad looked at me for the first time. His voice lowered to a near growl. You think this makes you better than me? I met his gaze. No, it makes me free. For a long second, neither of us moved. Then he turned away, muttering under his breath. Diana followed him inside. The deputy motioned for his partner, and they waited near the door as the two of them packed a few things. The house was quiet, except for the faint rustle of boxes and drawers opening. I stepped inside only when the deputy nodded. The air felt different. The scent of my mom's lavender soap was gone, replaced by stale perfume and dust. Still beneath it all, I could feel her presence. The walls seemed to breathe again. My dad came back down the stairs carrying a duffel bag. His eyes were bloodshot. You've humiliated me, he said. You did that yourself, I answered. He glared at me. I gave you everything. You gave me lessons, I said. Not all of them are good. Diana brushed past me without a word, a suitcase rolling behind her. Eden trailed after them, her expression caught between anger and shame. No one spoke as they stepped out into the cold. The deputy closed his notebook and turned to me. It's done. I'll file the confirmation this afternoon. He tipped his hat again. Congratulations, ma'am. When the cars pulled away, the silence was almost unbearable. I walked through the room, slowly touching the backs of chairs, the edges of frames. The light through this kitchen window hit the counter just right, the way it had when my mom used to roll out pie crusts on winter mornings. I could almost hear her hum under her breath. I went to study last. My mom's old desk was still there, though the drawers had been emptied. On instinct, I opened the bottom one. A single photograph lay inside, left behind. It was from years ago, before everything fell apart. My mom, my dad, and me are standing in the backyard smiling. I stared at it for a long moment, then set it face down. Later that afternoon, I called Grace. It's done, I said. They're gone. Her voice was warm, steady. How do you feel? Tired? Relieved? Maybe both. You did what she couldn't, Grace said. You finished it. After we hung up, I sat in the living room as the sun began to set. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old wall clock. I made tea the way Mom used to, with a slice of lemon and too much honey. The first sip burned my tongue, but I didn't mind. I thought of all the times my dad's voice had filled these rooms, the sound of authority that used to silence everything. Now there was only stillness. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. As the last light faded, I walked outside to the porch. The snow had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. Across the street, a few neighbors had gathered, whispering. One of them waved hesitantly. I nodded back, not unkindly. I didn't owe them the story, but they could see the ending written across the quiet. When I went back inside, I locked the door behind me. The key turned smoothly, the sound small but final. The heater kicked on and warm air filled the hallway. I stood there for a long time, my hand resting on the doorframe, feeling the pulse of the house beneath my palm. It was mine now in every way that mattered. I walked through to the dining room and turned off the last of the lights. In the reflection of the darkened window, I saw myself standing where my mom once did. The outline was different, but the strength felt the same. Outside, a single snowflake drifted past the glass, catching the streetlight as it fell. The world was still waiting. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The fight was over, but the story wasn't. Not yet. The house was quiet in a way it had never been before. No voices, no footsteps, no sharp tone cutting through the air. Just the faint hum of the heater and the creak of old wood settling back into itself. I had spent the entire morning cleaning, polishing, and restoring. Every cabinet I opened carried the ghost of what used to be there, and every time I shut one, it felt like sealing a chapter closed. When I reached the study, I stopped. The room was the only part of the house that still smelled faintly like her. Lavender and paper. I opened the blinds, and light fell across the desk where my mom used to grade papers, her handwriting looping across red ink and lesson plans. The bottom drawer stuck when I tried to pull it. It always had. I gave it a firm tug, and it slid open, revealing a small wooden box tucked in the corner. I didn't remember seeing it before. The top was scratched and dull, but when I lifted it, something rattled inside. My pulse quickened. I set it on the desk and opened it carefully. Inside was a single flash drive, old and dusty, wrapped in tissue paper. There was a note folded beneath it in my mom's handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the paper. If you are reading this, it means you finally came home. Plug this in, sweetheart, you'll understand. I swallowed hard and turned on the laptop I had brought downstairs. The screen flickered to life, the cursor blinking patiently. I inserted the drive. A single video file appeared. It was dated 2 weeks before she died. When the video started, my mom's face filled the screen. Her hair was thinner, her cheeks hollowed, but her eyes were bright. She smiled faintly. If you're watching this, Jayla, I'm guessing things have unfolded just like I feared. You always had faith that people could change, especially your dad. I wanted that to be true too. But he's not a man who learns from loss. He only hides it. Her voice wavered and she took a slow breath. I made sure you'd have the house. It's more than just walls and rooms. It's protection. It's proof of who you are. Don't let him take it from you. And when you finally stand in this room again, I hope you'll feel what I meant when I said strength isn't about fighting. Louder. It's about knowing when you've already won. The screen went dark. I sat there for a long time, staring at the reflection of my own face on the blank screen. Tears slid down before I even realized I was crying. I pressed my fingers to the desk, the same desk she had written her last letters on, and whispered into the empty air. I'm here, Mom. I came back. Outside, the snow had started again. The light in the room dimmed, the glow from the screen casting a faint blue shadow on the walls. I wiped my face and stood looking around the study. For the first time since reclaiming the house, I felt the quiet settle not as emptiness but as peace. Later that afternoon, I called Grace. She answered on the first ring. You sound like you've been crying, she said gently. I found something, I told her. A message from my mom. Grace's voice softened. What did she say? She told me I'd understand, I said, and I think I finally do. There was silence on the line, the kind that carried meaning without words. Then she said, You've done right by her, Jayla. You gave her the ending she couldn't write for herself. After we hung up, I went into the kitchen and made tea, the way my mom always did when she needed to think. I sat by the window watching the snow cover the garden. The rose bushes were gone, but I could still see where they had once grown, small dark humps beneath the white. I decided I would replant them in the spring. As the hours passed, the house began to feel more like itself. I put my mom's picture back on the mantel, replacing the one of Diana and my dad that I had thrown away earlier that week. The silver frame caught the light from the fire, and her smile seemed to warm the whole room. That evening, as I sorted through the last of the boxes in the hallway, I found a small envelope addressed to Grace. The handwriting was my mom's, dated the same week as the video. Inside was a short letter. Grace, if Jayla ever comes to you for help, guide her, but let her lead. She has more of me in her than she realizes. I smiled through tears and tucked the letter into the box with the flash drive. There were no grand gestures in my mom's way of loving. She believed in quiet acts and planting things that would outlive her. Later that night, I sat in the living room with the fire crackling softly. The air smelled of pine and smoke. I closed my eyes and listened, half expecting to hear her humming in the kitchen. Instead, I heard my own breathing steady and calm. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Grace. "The paperwork is finalized," it read. "The court has recognized full ownership. No further action required." I stared at the screen, then set it aside. The words didn't bring triumph, they brought stillness. The kind that comes when a weight you've carried for too long finally falls away. I got up and walked through the house again, room by room. The hallway, the kitchen, the study, the bedrooms. Each one felt lighter. I paused at the front door, pressing my palm to the frame. The wood was smooth and warm beneath my touch. This was home again, not just in name but in spirit. When I returned to the study, the light from the fireplace flickered across the floor. I sat down at the desk, opened my journal, and began to write. Not about revenge, not about my dad, but about my mom. About her laugh, her lessons, her quiet strength. I wrote until the words ran out, then closed the notebook and placed it beside the flash drive. Before going to bed, I stepped outside. The sky was clear, stars glittering against the dark. The air bit at my cheeks, and I could see my breath in small white clouds. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. I whispered into the cold, "I did it, Mom. I kept my promise." Inside the house felt warmer. I turned off the lights and went upstairs. For the first time in years, I slept without waking, without replaying old words or faces. In my dream, my mom stood in the garden, surrounded by blooming roses, her hands in the soil, smiling. When I reached her, she touched my cheek and said softly, "Welcome home." It started with a phone call from Grace on a gray Tuesday morning. Her voice was steady but held a weight I hadn't heard before. "There's something you should know," she said. I was already sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling between my hands. "What happened?" I asked. "There's been a development at your dad's firm. Someone tipped off the compliance board about financial irregularities from years ago. They're launching an internal investigation." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall filled the silence. "You think it was him?" I asked. Grace sighed softly. "The records we found in your mom's files, the fake consent forms, it looks like they're connected. I sent them to the authorities months ago when we were finalizing your case. I didn't expect it to move this fast." I stared out the window. The snow from last week had melted, leaving patches of brown grass. Somewhere deep down, I had known this was coming. Actions have a way of catching up, even if you stop chasing them. "What will happen to him?" I asked quietly. Grace hesitated. "Best case, he loses his position. Worst case, he faces charges." I closed my eyes. "Thank you for telling me." After we hung up, I sat in the silence of the kitchen for a long time. The house was warm sunlight filtering through the curtains. The world felt calm, but underneath that calm was a strange, heavy stillness. Not guilt exactly, but the recognition that justice doesn't always arrive clean. Later that afternoon, I went into town for groceries. The small store near the post office was quiet, a few people in line chatting about the coming snow. As I walked past the newspaper rack, a headline caught my eye. "Financial Director under investigation for misuse of client funds." Beneath it was his picture, smaller, grainy, but unmistakable. My dad in his office suit, eyes tired, mouth set in that same defiant line I had known all my life. I bought the paper, folded it neatly, and carried it home without reading further. That night, I sat by the fire with the newspaper on my lap. The flames flickered across the words, distorting them slightly. I thought about the way my dad had looked when the deputies escorted him out of the house, that mix of rage and disbelief, the same expression he wore whenever he was faced with consequences. There was a time when I would have felt sorry for him. Even now, part of me wanted to. But sympathy without accountability is just another kind of surrender. The next morning, Grace called again. "It's official," she said. "He's been suspended pending investigation. Diana filed for separation." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "How is he taking it?" "Not well," she said, "but that's not your burden anymore." After the call, I went for a walk down the lane. The air was crisp, the kind that makes your breath visible. I passed the neighbor's mailbox, the one with the rusted flag my mom used to complain about. The world around me looked the same, but everything had shifted. When I came back, I stood at the gate and looked up at the house. For months I had fought to reclaim it, and now it finally felt whole again. The roses still slept beneath the frozen soil, but I could almost imagine them blooming. I whispered into the cold, "Mom, it's over." Inside, I made a pot of tea and sat at the kitchen table. The silence felt different now. Not empty, not haunted, just quiet. 2 days later, an envelope arrived in the mail addressed to me. The handwriting was unfamiliar but formal. Inside was a single page from the compliance board. It confirmed that the investigation had been initiated after a tip supported by documented evidence. They thanked me for my cooperation. Though I hadn't intended to be directly involved, I folded the letter and placed it in the same box where I kept my mom's note. That evening, I received another message, this one from an unknown number. It was short. "You ruined me." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "No, Dad, you did that yourself." There was no answer. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. In the days that followed, the town's whispers grew louder. People talked in hushed tones at the diner, in the post office, at the bank. Some looked at me with pity, others with quiet admiration. I didn't respond to any of it. Let them build their own version of the story. I had lived the truth. That was enough. One afternoon, I drove past the office where my dad had worked for nearly 20 years. His name had already been removed from the sign outside. The empty parking space near the front looked strange, like an unspoken pause in a sentence that used to be too loud. I didn't stop. When I got home, I found the answering machine blinking. A single message. His voice filled the room softer than I'd ever heard it. "Jayla, I don't know what you want from me. Maybe you never will. But I hope one day you understand, that's all." I listened to it twice, then pressed delete. Understanding had nothing to do with forgiveness. That night, as I sat in the study, the quiet felt different again. It wasn't the quiet of waiting. It was quiet after something ended. I opened the window and let the cold air in, the scent of pine and snow mixing with the warmth of the fire. The next morning brought sunlight, pale but steady. I spent the day cleaning, wiping down the old shelves, organizing files, dusting picture frames. Around noon, there was a knock on the door. It was the mail carrier holding a small package. No return address. Inside was a photo. My dad was standing outside his old office. His shoulders slumped, his face turned away. On the back, someone had written a single line in pencil. "Every lie eventually meets its winter." I didn't know who sent it. Maybe someone from the firm, maybe fate itself, but I placed it inside the same box as the others. Then I locked the drawer. That evening, I lit a candle with my mom's picture. The flame flickered gently, reflecting in the glass. I whispered, "It's done." As the house filled with the faint scent of wax and smoke, I realized I didn't feel victory or vengeance. What I felt was peace, the kind that comes not from winning, but from finally letting go. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering the last of the snow from the roof. I watched it drift into the night, slow and quiet. Somewhere out there, he was facing the echoes of his choices. I didn't need to see it. I already knew how it would sound. The following winter arrived softer than the one before. The air no longer carried the sharpness of grief or anger, only the quiet calm of something that had finally settled. I woke early on Easter morning, the house still dim with the blue light of dawn. Snow covered the yard like a clean page. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the day. I set a pot of coffee on the stove, humming to myself the same melody my mom used to hum when she baked. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the kitchen as I began to cook. By noon, the dining table was set. Simple white plates, candles, and a small wreath of pine in the center. I had invited only 3 people. Grace, who had become more family than friend, and 2 of my neighbors who had checked in on me through the long months of repairs and silence. When the doorbell rang, the house felt alive again. Grace stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat. She looked around and smiled. "You've done wonders, Jayla." It feels like her again. I laughed softly. That was the goal. We spent the afternoon cooking together, trading stories, and letting the warmth of the oven fill the house. Every so often, I caught Grace studying me the way she used to study my mom, as if checking to make sure I was truly all right. And for once, I was. When the meal was ready, we gathered around the table. The fire in the living room crackled softly, and the sound of wind against the window blended with our laughter. Grace raised her glass. "To your mom," she said, "and to new beginnings." I clinked my glass with hers. "To peace," I said. After dinner, I walked outside for a breath of cold air. The snow was still falling soft and fine, catching the porch light. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the faint chime of church bells from the distance. I thought of the Easters that had come before, of the years when I sat at a table that wasn't mine, pretending to belong. Those days felt like someone else's life now. When I came back inside, Grace was by the fireplace holding an envelope. "This came for you," she said. It was delivered to my office yesterday. I took it and saw the handwriting immediately. It was from Eden. My pulse skipped, but I opened it slowly. The letter was short. Jayla, I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't understand back then. Mom is living with her sister now. Dad isn't doing well. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I see things differently now. I folded the paper carefully and placed it on the mantel beside my mom's picture. Grace watched me. Will you write her back? Maybe, I said. Maybe not. Some apologies are enough just being heard. Grace nodded, understanding, without another word. She stayed a while longer before leaving, her car lights glowing briefly through the falling snow as she drove away. Later that night, I lit a single candle on the table and sat down with a cup of tea. The flame flickered, throwing soft light against the walls. I looked around at the house, at the mended curtains, the newly painted trim, the photograph of my mom in her garden. Everything was as it should be. I thought about my dad then. I hadn't seen him since the investigation began. Grace said he'd lost his position and moved into a small apartment in the city. No one had heard much since. There was a time when that would have satisfied me. Now it just felt distant, like a chapter that had closed itself. I took a sip of tea and smiled faintly. I could almost hear my mom's voice saying that revenge has an expiration date, and peace is what comes after. Before going to bed, I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. The ground was buried under snow, but in my mind I could already see the roses growing again come spring. I had ordered new plants from the same nursery my mom used to buy from. Each one had a name she had once chosen for her students: Hope, Grace, and Faith. I would plant them exactly where she had, and maybe when they bloomed, the house would feel whole in a way it hadn't since she left. The next morning I woke to sunlight spilling across the floor. The storm had passed. The world outside glittered under a fresh layer of white. I made breakfast and turned on the radio. Soft Easter music played, the kind my mom loved. I laughed to myself when I burned the first batch of pancakes. She would have teased me for that. Later, I found myself sitting at the study desk again, the same spot where I had watched her last video. I opened my journal and began to write. Not about revenge or loss, but about the small things that make a person whole. The way light shifts through a window at dawn. The smell of coffee in an empty kitchen. The sound of forgiveness even when it isn't spoken aloud. As I wrote, I realized I wasn't writing to her anymore. I was writing for myself. That afternoon, the neighbors dropped by with pie. We sat by the fire, talking about the town, the weather, small things that felt like a return to normal life. When they left, I stayed by the fire until the embers turned to ash. The clock on the wall ticked softly. The house no longer felt like something I had to defend. It felt like something I could finally live in. I walked through each room, turning off the lights one by one. The study, the kitchen, the hallway. When I reached the living room, I stopped by the photo of my mom again. The candle beside it had nearly burned out, the wax pooling at the base. I whispered, "I hope you're proud." A faint creak came from the hallway, a familiar sound the old house always made when the temperature dropped. It made me smile. Before going upstairs, I looked around one last time. The house was warm, the walls glowing in the faint light. For the first time in years, there was no shadow of the past waiting around the corner. As I climbed the stairs, I felt the weight of everything that had come before lift just a little higher off my shoulders. The house was quiet again, but it was a good quiet this time. The kind that feels like peace, not absence. In bed, I pulled the blanket close and closed my eyes. The snow outside shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and the wind whispered against the glass like a lullaby. I thought of my mom's words in that last video, about knowing when you've already won. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had my life back. It was late when I decided to write the story. The house was quiet, the fire low. The only sound was the soft ticking of the old clock in the hallway. I sat at the desk in my mom's study, the same one where she wrote her lesson plans and letters, and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen filled the room. For months I'd carried everything inside me, the anger, the grief, the long ache of justice finally delivered. But silence, even the peaceful kind, can grow too heavy. So I opened a blank page and began to type. My dad called me a parasite at Easter dinner. What happened next ended his career. The words came easily, smoother than I expected. I didn't dress them up or make them pretty. I just told the truth. About the night he threw me out. About how he moved into the house that wasn't his. About how I found my mom's will and learned that she had protected me even after she was gone. I wrote about Grace, about the evidence, about the law, about how justice sometimes moves slow but never stops moving. I told it all. When I finished, I read it back from the beginning. The story felt like mine, but also like something separate, something that belonged to anyone who had ever been called small or worthless and had learned to stand tall again. I hesitated before hitting the post, then clicked. I uploaded it anonymously to a subreddit I had followed for years, a place where people shared their stories of revenge and redemption. The title stayed the same. My dad called me a parasite at Easter dinner. What happened next ended his career. For a long while, I just stared at the screen. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Notifications filled the screen. Hundreds of comments, thousands of upvotes. Strangers from all over the world wrote messages like, "You handled that with such grace, and boundaries are the best revenge." One said this story healed something in me. I scrolled through them, slowly letting the words sink in. It wasn't the praise that mattered, it was the connection. People understood. They had lived their own versions of it in their own houses, with their own ghosts. By evening, the post had spread beyond Reddit. Someone shared it on a Facebook group, then another on a blog. People began calling it the Silent Revenger. That name made me smile. It wasn't about rage or payback. It was about calm, deliberate justice. It was about the quiet. A few days later, I got an email from Grace. She had seen the story. "You wrote it beautifully," she said. "Your mom would be proud." I wrote back. "I think she already knows." That week, the air softened again, spring edging closer. I spent most of my days tending to the house, repainting the porch, and cleaning the garden. The snow had melted, revealing the dark earth underneath. When I dug into the soil to plant the rose bushes, I found the ground rich and damp, full of life. I pressed each root into place, whispering the names my mom had given them. Hope, grace, and faith. In the evenings, I sat by the window with tea, reading comments from people who had found the post. Some shared their own stories of betrayal and recovery. Others just thanked me for writing it. I realized then that what had started as revenge had turned into something else. It had become a kind of mirror for anyone who had ever been broken and rebuilt themselves quietly. One night, as I sat watching the fire, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Eden standing there, snow in her hair, her coat unbuttoned. She looked different, older, softer. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," she said. I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." She walked into the living room, her eyes moving over the pictures on the wall. She stopped at the photo of my mom, her fingers brushing the frame. "She was beautiful," Eden said. "I didn't understand back then. I thought Mom was doing what was best for us. I see now how wrong that was." I poured her tea, and we sat by the fire. Neither of us said much for a while. Finally, she looked up. "Dad's been sick. He asked about you." I nodded slowly. "I hope he finds peace." Eden smiled faintly. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do." She left not long after leaving her cup on the table. I stood at the window and watched her walk down the drive, her figure fading into the white haze. For the first time, I didn't feel the pull of old anger. I felt released. Later that week, I went through the garden one last time before the frost ended. The rose bushes had taken root. Tiny green buds pushed through the soil, small and stubborn. I knelt down, brushed away the dirt, and whispered, "You did it, Mom. It's alive again." That night, I opened my laptop to find a message pinned at the top of my story. It read, "Thank you for reminding us that revenge doesn't always need noise. Sometimes silence is the loudest victory." I closed the computer and sat back. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the room. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow and steady, blanketing everything in white. The kind of quiet that carries peace, not emptiness. I picked up my journal and wrote a single sentence. Justice served, peace restored. Then I turned off the light and went upstairs. The house settled around me, warm and familiar. The past had finally folded itself away, leaving room for something new. Before I fell asleep, I whispered into the dark, "I'm home, Mom, and this time it's for good." Have you ever been told you don't belong, only to prove that you did all along? Tell me your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you found your peace. And if this story spoke to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories where silence speaks louder than anger.